The chamber was old, older than most stars that humanity had learned to name. Its walls curved upward, like the inside of a living shell, and the light that filled it had no single source. It simply existed, the way gravity existed, the way silence existed in the deepest parts of space. Thousands of seats rose in tiers around a central platform, and in those seats sat the representatives of 412 species. Each one older than the last, each one watching the small woman who stood alone on the floor below them. Yun-Nari did not look small. She was, by any measurement, short, thin, her dark hair pulled back in a plain knot, her gray suit unremarkable among the glowing robes and crystalline shells of the alien delegates. But she stood the way a person stands when they have already decided something, and the decision has made them calm. She had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council for 9 years. 9 years of smiling at creatures who thought humans were clever animals. 9 years of listening to speeches about how young humanity was, how much they had to learn, how grateful they should be for the seat they had been given at this table. She had smiled through all of it, because that was her job, and Yun-Nari was very good at her job. Today, she was not smiling. The Velhari High Speaker stood on the central platform across from her. It was an insectoid creature, tall and thin, with 6 arms folded neatly against its thorax, and compound eyes that reflected the chamber light like shattered mirrors. The Velhari had governed the Galactic Council for 800,000 years. They did not fight wars. They did not need to. They had the Dumi for that. The High Speaker's voice was translated into every language simultaneously. A dry clicking sound turned into smooth words that filled the chamber. The Council has reviewed the territorial claim submitted by the Dumi Collective regarding the 3 colony systems in the Heian Corridor. The claim has been found valid under Galactic Precedent 7. The human settlements in those systems will be relocated within 90 standard cycles. This matter is concluded. Yun-Nari stood still for a moment. Around her, 412 species shifted in their seats, already moving on to the next item, already forgetting the small woman on the floor. The Heian Corridor was rich in rare minerals that powered faster-than-light engines. 3 human colonies, 2 million people, farms and schools and hospitals built over 20 years. Gone in a single sentence. She pressed the communication device on her wrist and transmitted the Council's decision to Earth. 6 hours passed. Nari waited in a small room off the main chamber. She drank tea that tasted wrong because the water on this station was recycled through alien filtration systems. She read messages from her sister back in Incheon, who wanted to know if she was eating enough. She did not eat. When the response came from Earth, it came with a recording. The United Earth Parliament had debated for the full 6 hours. Senators had shouted. Some had wept. But in the end, they had asked one person, one question. Fleet Admiral Han Do-hyun sat in a chair in front of the Parliament. He was a man in his mid-50s, with gray at his temples, and eyes that looked like they had been tired for a very long time, but had forgotten how to close. He wore his uniform without decoration. No medals, no ribbons. Just the plain, dark fabric of a man who did not need to prove anything. A senator asked him, "Admiral, can we fight?" Han Do-hyun looked at the senator for a long time. The chamber was quiet. 2 billion people were watching the broadcast across Earth and its colonies. "That is the wrong question," he said. His voice was soft, almost gentle. "The real question is, can they survive what happens if we do?" The Parliament voted. The result was not close. Yun-Nari walked back into the council chamber. The delegates had moved on to trade agreements. The Pelori delegate, a being made of light that shifted between blue and gold, was discussing shipping lanes. The Velhari High Speaker was reviewing documents with 2 of its 6 hands, while the others gestured to aides. Nobody looked at her. She stepped onto the central platform and activated the translation system. The sound that followed, a sharp, clear tone, cut through every conversation in the chamber. 412 species turned to look at the small woman who should not have been speaking. The United Earth Parliament has reviewed the Council's decision regarding the Heian corridor, Nari said. Her voice was steady, her hands were steady, nothing about her shook. The High Speaker's compound eyes focused on her. This matter is concluded, Ambassador. There is nothing to review. Humanity respectfully declines, Nari said. We will defend what is ours. The silence that followed was not the ordinary silence of a pause between words. It was the silence of a room full of ancient beings who had just heard something they did not believe. The Velhari High Speaker's 6 arms went still. The Pelori delegate's light froze between colors. In the upper tiers, the Duumi representative, a massive creature of dark stone and metal, 3 meters tall, with fists that could crush starship hull plating, leaned forward in its seat. 412 species stared at the human ambassador. They had been alive for so long that they had forgotten what it looked like when a species decided that some things were worth more than survival. Yunari did not forget. She had grown up on Earth, where people had been making that decision since the first human picked up a rock and stood between danger and the people they loved. She walked back to her quarters, sat down, and sent a message to Admiral Han Do-hyun. It contained 2 words. They laughed. His reply came 30 seconds later. 3 words. They will learn. The galaxy laughed for 2 days. Every communication network, every signal channel, every glowing screen on every station from the core worlds to the outer ring carried the same story. The humans had refused to surrender. The humans, with their 300 ships and their 42 years in the galactic community, had told the Duumi who had never lost a war in recorded history, that they would fight. Comedy shows on Velhari entertainment channels ran segments about it. A popular Pelori philosopher published an essay titled The Beauty of Ignorant Courage, and it was shared 4 billion times in a single day. Betting markets opened across the galaxy on how long the human fleet would last. The most popular odds gave humanity 11 minutes. 11 minutes. That was the number the analysts agreed on. 11 minutes from the moment the Duumi Grand Armada engaged the human fleet to the moment the last human ship stopped moving. Yunari read the essays and watched the comedy segments in her quarters on Eldara Prime. She poured herself tea, and she laughed too, but her laugh was the quiet kind, the kind that lived behind her teeth and never quite reached her eyes. On Earth, no one was laughing. Fleet Admiral Han Do-hyun stood in the command center of the Ueen Baekdu, the flagship of the United Earth Navy. The Baekdu was not the largest ship in the fleet, it was not the most heavily armed, but it was fast, and it was smart, and every system on board had been designed by people who understood something that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. That war was not about size. It was about thinking faster than the enemy. Do-hyun looked at the display that showed the Duumi Grand Armada assembling near the border of the Heian corridor. Each one was the size of a small moon, built from compressed mineral alloys that could withstand plasma bombardment for hours. Their weapons could crack planetary crusts. Their shields could absorb the output of a small star. 300 human ships against 4,000 Duumi warships. The math was simple. The math said humanity was dead. Han Do-hyun did not care about math. He cared about ideas. He turned to the young officer standing beside him. Bae Jinho was 28 years old, thin, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he had not slept in several days. Jinho was a tactical officer, and 2 years ago he had run a simulation that changed everything. The simulation was simple. Jinho had asked a question no one else had thought to ask. What if the Duumi were not strong because of their ships, but because no one had ever fought them with a different kind of thinking. Every species that had faced the Doomy had done the same thing. They lined up their fleets, they fired their weapons, and they died. It was the way war had been fought in the galaxy for millions of years. Big ships shooting at other big ships until one side had no ships left. Jinho had run the numbers differently. He had studied human military history, ancient battles on Earth, naval warfare, guerrilla tactics, the way small forces had defeated larger ones again and again throughout human history. And he had found something that made his hands shake when he showed it to Admiral Han Do-hyun. The Doomy had a blind spot, not a physical one, but a conceptual one. They could not imagine an enemy that did not fight the way they expected. Their sensors, their formations, their entire military doctrine was built on the assumption that war looked a certain way. If someone changed what war looked like, the Doomy would not know how to respond. And, in a battle, immediately was all that mattered. Han Do-hyun had listened to Jinho's findings, sat quietly for 10 minutes, and then began building Operation Jindo. Now, 2 years later, the pieces were in place. In the cold dark of space, 12 ships drifted without power, without signal, without any sign of life. They were corvettes, small and angular, painted in materials that absorbed sensor waves like water absorbed light. They carried lies. Deep inside the Baekdu, in a workshop that smelled like burnt metal and coffee, Chief Engineer Shin Tae-woo ran his final checks on the weapon he had built. The gravity lance was not large. It sat in a housing no bigger than a shuttle engine. But when activated, it folded local space-time into a point of impossible density. Anything caught in that fold was compressed, crushed, reduced to matter so dense it collapsed into itself. The technology was not new. The galaxy had theorized about space-time weapons for millions of years. But every species had decided they were too dangerous, too unstable, too unpredictable to use. Shin Tae-woo had built one anyway. He had built 300 of them, one for every ship in the fleet. When people asked him if he was afraid of what he had created, he said yes. When they asked him why he built it anyway, he said because being afraid was not the same thing as stopping. In the Heian corridor, 2 million human colonists looked up at their sky and knew that somewhere beyond the stars they could see, a fleet was coming to take their homes. Some of them packed bags. Some of them held their children. Some of them stood outside and watched the stars and refused to move. Ambassador Yoon Nari requested one final session before the council. The Velhari High Speaker granted it, the way a parent grants a child's last request. Nari stood on the platform. The chamber was full. Every species wanted to watch the humans beg. She did not beg. "You see 300 ships, and you laugh," she said. "You have always counted our hulls. You never once counted our ideas." She paused and looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as she could find. "You should have counted our ideas." Behind her, someone in the upper tiers made a sound that might have been laughter. But a few delegates, the older ones, the ones who had seen enough history to know that the universe loved surprises, did not laugh. They watched the human woman leave, and they felt something they had not felt in a very long time. They were not sure what it was. Later, they would learn that the word for it was doubt. The Doomy Grand Armada entered the Heian corridor at full speed. 4,000 ships in perfect crescent formation, the most powerful military force assembled in 200,000 years. They expected to find a wall of 300 human ships waiting to die. They found empty space. The Doomy Grand Commander was a creature called Rothal. He was 900 years old, made of layered stone and living metal, and he had fought in 37 wars across his lifetime. He had never lost. None of his kind had ever lost. The concept of defeat existed in the Doomy language only as a word used to describe what happened to other species. When his fleet dropped out of hyperspace into the Heian corridor and found nothing waiting for them. Rothal felt a sensation he did not recognize. It was small, cold, and it sat somewhere behind the dense mineral plates of his chest. Later, he would learn that the human word for it was dread. "Scan the corridor," he ordered. "Find them." His sensor officers swept the area. Empty. No ships, no stations, no resistance. Just the quiet dark of open space and the distant light of 3 colony stars. For 11 seconds, nothing happened. Then, 20 million tiny objects woke up. They were drone mines, each one no larger than a human fist, scattered across the corridor in clouds so thin that no sensor could detect them as a group. They had been drifting there for weeks, cold and silent, waiting for a signal. When the Dumi fleet arrived, the signal came. The drones did not explode. They were not strong enough to damage Dumi warships. Instead, they swarmed. 20 million points of light rushed toward the fleet from every direction, above, below, behind, from within the formation itself. They attached themselves to sensor arrays, clogged weapon ports, covered shield emitters. They were sand, thrown into the eyes of a giant. The Dumi fleet went blind. Rothal watched his tactical display dissolve into static. Every ship in his fleet reported the same thing. Sensors blocked, targeting systems overwhelmed, point defense guns firing at millions of tiny targets and hitting nothing important. The drones were too small to destroy individually, too many to ignore, and too fast to brush away. "Clear them," Rothal ordered. "All ships, activate hull purge systems." The Dumi warships began venting superheated gas across their hulls, burning the drones away. It worked. Within 3 minutes the swarm was thinning. Rothal's sensors began to clear. And that was when the ghosts appeared. 12 signals erupted inside the Dumi formation. Not at the edges, not at a safe distance. Inside, among the warships, close enough to touch. Quan Soha's stealth corvettes decloaked in the heart of the fleet, and in the same instant they activated their electronic warfare systems. The corvettes did not fire a single weapon. They broadcast false signals, 12 ships pretending to be 1,200. Every Dumi sensor that had just recovered from the drone swarm now showed a massive human fleet materializing inside their own formation. 1,200 contacts, warships where there were none, weapons charging that did not exist, attack patterns forming out of empty space. The Dumi command network fractured. Ship captains, unable to tell real contacts from false ones, began repositioning. A warship turned hard to port to avoid a human cruiser that was not there, and collided with a sister ship. Another opened fire on a ghost signal and sent plasma bolts tearing through a Dumi destroyer behind it. The perfect crescent formation crumbled into chaos. Rothal roared orders into the command channel. Hold formation. Ignore the false signals. Maintain discipline. But discipline takes time, and time was something the Dumi did not have. At minute 6, the sky above the fleet split open. Han Do-hyun brought his 300 ships out of hyperspace in a position that should not have been possible. Directly above the Dumi formation, in a dimensional angle that Bae Jinho had identified as a blind spot in Dumi sensor architecture. Every Dumi sensor was designed to scan in a flat plane, because every species in the galaxy fought on a flat plane. No one attacked from above. There was no above in space. There was now. 300 human ships hung over the Dumi fleet like a hammer over glass, and on every single one of them, Shin Tae-woo's gravity lances powered to full charge. Admiral Han Do-hyun sat in his command chair on the Baekdu and looked at the display showing 4,000 Dumi warships in disarray below him. His face showed nothing. His hands were still. Beside him, Bae Jinho's fingers trembled over his console, his eyes wide, his breath short. "Jinho," Do-hyun said quietly. "Sir." "Breathe." Jinho breathed. "Fire," said Han Do-hyun. 300 gravity lances activated simultaneously. The effect was invisible to the naked eye, but devastating to everything it touched. Localized pockets of space-time folded inward, creating points of density so extreme that anything caught within them was compressed to nothing. Doomy warships, ships the size of small moons, ships that had survived plasma storms and asteroid impacts, and the weapons of 100 conquered species, crumpled like paper in a closing fist. The first volley destroyed 200 ships. The second volley, fired 12 seconds later, destroyed 200 more. Ships that had held formation for 900 years broke and ran in every direction, firing blindly, crashing into each other, trying to escape a weapon they did not understand and could not defend against. Quan Soha's ghost ships continued broadcasting false signals, herding panicked Doomy warships into kill zones where the gravity lances waited. Bei Jinho counted the seconds. He had run this simulation 1,000 times. He knew exactly when it would end. At minute 9, a signal came through the chaos. The Doomy Grand Commander Rothal, his flagship damaged, half his fleet destroyed or disabled, sent a single transmission on an open channel. "We yield." The bridge of the Baekdu was silent. Every officer looked at Admiral Han Do-hyun. He did not hesitate. He did not pause to savor the moment. He did not give a speech. "All ships cease fire immediately," he said. "Begin search and rescue operations. Every Doomy survivor is to be recovered and given medical attention. Every single one." The order went out. 300 human ships stopped firing and began pulling Doomy soldiers from the wreckage of their own fleet. Human medics boarded shattered warships and treated wounded Doomy with the same care they would have given their own people. Quan Soha decloaked her corvettes and joined the rescue effort. She personally guided her ship alongside a burning Doomy destroyer and held position while her crew cut through the hull to reach survivors trapped inside. In 11 minutes, the battle was over. 1,400 Doomy ships destroyed or disabled, 900 more damaged. The most powerful military force in galactic history, defeated. Human losses, 14 ships, 31 crew members killed. Admiral Han Do-hyun opened a channel to the Galactic Council. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. His voice was as soft as it had been when he spoke to the Parliament, as calm as it had been when he gave the order to fire. "Your analysts were correct about the time frame. They were simply wrong about who would be standing at the end." He closed the channel and turned to Jinho, who was sitting at his console with tears running down his face. 31, Jinho whispered. "We lost 31 people." Han Do-hyun put his hand on the young man's shoulder and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. 31 people had died, and no victory would bring them back, and a man who forgot that had no business commanding a fleet. Across the galaxy, the laughter stopped. The galaxy did not know what to do with silence. For 800,000 years, there had always been an answer. The Velhari governed, the Doomy enforced, the Pelori judged, and everyone else obeyed. It was not a perfect system, but it was a system, and systems were comfortable. When a species misbehaved, the Doomy corrected them. When a territory was disputed, the council decided. When someone asked who was in charge, the answer was always the same. Now the answer was broken, floating in pieces across the Heian corridor, and 412 species sat in their ancient seats and waited for someone to tell them what came next. The first 3 days after the battle were chaos. Not the violent kind, the quiet kind, the kind that happens inside minds when the thing they believed was unbreakable breaks. Communication channels across the galaxy filled with questions. How did the humans win? What were those weapons? Will they come for us next? That last question was the one that mattered. It spread through the galactic community like a fever. The humans had just done something no species had done in recorded history. They had defeated the Doomy. They had weapons that could fold space-time. They had 300 ships that had torn apart 4,000. What would they want? On the Velhari homeworld, the High Speaker called an emergency session of the Inner Council. The meeting lasted 4 days. No official record was released, but sources later said that for the first time in 800,000 years, the Velhari discussed the possibility that they might not be in control anymore. The Pelari, the light beings who served as the galaxy's moral authorities, dimmed. This was their equivalent of panic. Pelori scholars published frantic analyses of human psychology, trying to understand what kind of species fought a war it should not have been able to win, and then immediately began rescuing the enemy. The analyses disagreed with each other. The Pelori could not make humans fit into any category they had. Minor species, the ones who had spent millennia under council rule, following orders, paying tribute, keeping their heads down, began to stir. Some of them sent secret messages to Earth, offering loyalty, resources, alliance. They wanted to be on the winning side. Other species armed themselves. If the humans could build space-time weapons, maybe they could too. An arms race began in laboratories across the galaxy, quiet and desperate. And in the middle of all of it, the doomy Grand Commander Rothal lay in a medical bed on a human hospital ship, his shattered body being repaired by human doctors who brought him water and checked his wounds and called him Sir. He did not understand them. He had tried to take their homes. He had brought 4,000 warships to crush them. And now they were healing him, carefully, gently, as if the war had never happened. A young human nurse named Park Unji changed his bandages one morning and asked him if the light level in his room was comfortable. He stared at her for a long time and said nothing, because in 900 years of war, no one had ever asked him if he was comfortable after trying to kill them. 3 weeks passed. The galaxy waited. Then Yun-Nari walked into the council chamber. She had not been seen in public since the battle. Rumors said she had returned to Earth. Others said she was negotiating in secret with the Doomy. No one knew for certain. The truth was simpler. She had been sitting in her quarters on Eldara Prime, working on a document with President Oh Mi-young, rewriting it again and again until every word was exactly right. Oh Mi-young was not the kind of president the galaxy expected. She was 63 years old, quiet, with rough hands, and a face that looked like it had spent more time in sunlight than in meeting rooms. She had grown up on a farming colony in the outer systems, where the soil was thin and the seasons were wrong, and every harvest was a small miracle. She had entered politics not because she wanted power, but because she was tired of watching powerful people make bad decisions. When her generals came to her after the battle and laid out options, demand territory, seize Doomy resources, dissolve the council, establish human dominance, she listened to all of them. Then she asked a question that none of them expected. What kind of galaxy do we want to live in? The generals did not have an answer for that. Generals rarely did. Oh Mi-young wrote the answer herself. Yun-Nari carried it into the council chamber on a single datapad. The chamber was full. Every species had sent representatives. The upper galleries were packed with observers from worlds that had never cared about council proceedings before. Every sensor, every eye, every luminous tendril was fixed on the human woman standing alone on the central platform. They expected demands. They expected terms of surrender. They expected the humans to do what every victorious species in galactic history had done: take what they could and rule what they took. Nari activated the translation system and read Oh Mi-young's words. Humanity did not fight this war to conquer. We fought because we were given no choice. We do not wish to rule this galaxy. We have enough trouble ruling ourselves. A ripple moved through the chamber. Confusion, disbelief. But we will no longer sit quietly while others decide our fate without our voice, Nari continued. We propose the following. The Galactic Council will be reformed. No species may be stripped of its territory without its consent. No vote may exclude the species it affects. Every voice will be heard, not because it is powerful, but because it exists. She paused and looked up at the Doomy section of the chamber, where officers sat in rigid silence. The Doomy survivors, all of them, will be returned home with honor. They fought bravely. We do not punish courage. The chamber was so quiet that Nari could hear the hum of the station's life support systems. We did not choose war because we love it. We chose it because you left us no other door. Now we are building new doors. Walk through them with us, or do not. But we will never again be the species that kneels. She lowered the datapad. She did not move. She stood there and let the silence do its work. The Velhari high speaker stared at her with all of its compound eyes. 800,000 years of governance, and it had never heard a victorious species ask for less than everything. It did not know how to respond. Its 6 arms hung at its sides like forgotten things. In the medical bay of the human hospital ship, Rothal watched the broadcast on a screen above his bed. Nurse Parkunji stood nearby, pretending to check equipment, quietly watching the old warrior's face. When Nari finished speaking, Rothal was quiet for a long time. Then he said one word in his species' ancient language. The word had no clean translation, but the closest human meaning was something between worthy and respected enemy, and someone who has earned the right to stand beside us. Parkunji did not understand the word, but she saw something change in the old warrior's stone face. Something that might have been the Doomy version of respect, or grief, or wonder. She brought him water. He took it. Outside, the galaxy held its breath and tried to understand what kind of species wins a war and then gives the victory away. 1 year passed, and the galaxy was not the same. The reforms were signed on a Tuesday, because Nari insisted that history should happen on ordinary days. The document was called the Nari Accords, which embarrassed her deeply. But 412 species had voted on the name, and she had lost that argument the way she lost very few arguments, completely and without appeal. The Accords were simple. Every species had a vote. No territory could be taken without the consent of the species that lived there. A new Galactic court would hear disputes before they became wars, and the Council would never again make a decision about a species without that species in the room. It was not perfect. Nothing involving 412 species and their thousands of years of grudges and fears and ambitions could be perfect. But it was better, and sometimes better was enough. Nari became the first human to chair the reformed Galactic Council. She wore the same gray suits she had always worn. She drank the same badly filtered tea. She worked 18-hour days and argued with delegates who were older than Earth's oceans. And she won most of those arguments because she had spent a decade learning how to be patient with creatures who thought they knew everything. On the days when the work was too heavy, she stood by the observation window of Ildara Prime and watched the stars and missed the rain. She had grown up near the coast, where the rain came sideways off the sea, and she missed the sound of it on windows. Space was beautiful, but it was always dry. She kept a message on her personal device from Admiral Han Do-hyun. It was from the night before the battle, and it said, "Whatever happens tomorrow, you gave them a chance to choose differently. That matters, even if they did not take it." She read it on bad days. It helped. Han Do-hyun himself had retired. He submitted his resignation the week after the Accords were signed, and when the Parliament asked him to reconsider, he said that a fleet admiral who stayed too long became a politician, and the galaxy had enough of those. He went home to Busan and took a teaching position at Earth's military academy. His classes were always full, not because he taught students how to win battles, but because of what he said on the first day of every course. He would stand in front of a room full of young officers and say, "The purpose of a fleet is to make war unnecessary. If you have to fire, you have already half failed." Our job is to be so prepared, so capable, and so calm that no one ever wants to test us. And if they do test us, our job is to end it quickly and then help them stand back up. That is what strength looks like. Everything else is just violence with a uniform. The cadets who expected a war hero found a quiet man who spoke softly and paused often and asked them questions they could not answer. The best ones came back the next year and tried again. Bei Jinho never returned to the military. After the battle, he had spent 2 weeks in his quarters on the Baekdu, not sleeping, running the engagement over and over in his mind, counting the 31 names of the crew members who had died. He knew all their names. He would always know all their names. When the Doomy government, in a gesture that shocked the galaxy, proposed a joint research initiative with humanity to study space-time mechanics, Jinho was asked to lead the human side. He accepted, because the work was interesting, and because his Doomy counterparts, massive, stone-bodied engineers who approached physics with the patience of creatures who lived for centuries, treated him not as the man who had found their weakness, but as a colleague who understood something about the universe that they wanted to learn. Jinho was uncomfortable with his fame. Reporters wanted interviews. Universities wanted lectures. He declined all of them, and spent his days in a laboratory where the lights were too bright, and the coffee was terrible, and the equations on his screens were beautiful. He was, for the first time since before the war, something close to happy. Kwon Soha took command of Earth's new deep space exploration wing. Her ghost ships were refitted, the electronic warfare systems replaced with long-range sensors and research equipment. She took her 12 corvettes past the borders of Council space into regions no map species had ever visited, and she found things that made her forget she had ever been a soldier. She found nebulae that glowed in colors human eyes had never seen. She found a binary star system where the 2 stars orbited each other so closely that their surfaces touched and their light sang in radio frequencies, a slow, deep song that her crew recorded and played on repeat during long shifts. She found a planet made entirely of crystal, where the wind created harmonics that sounded like a choir. She sent postcards to Yoon Nari, not official reports, actual postcards, images with short notes written in Soha's sharp handwriting. Found a nebula that looks like a peony, thought of home. Nari pinned them to the wall of her office on Ildara Prime. They were the only decoration in the room. Shin Tae-woo locked away the Gravity Lance blueprints. He sealed them in a classified archive with his own biometric key. And when the military asked him to build more, he refused. "I built it so we would survive," he said. "Now that we have, no one should ever need it again." He transferred to the Civilian Engineering Corps and spent his days designing power systems for colony worlds. Clean energy, efficient grids, the quiet work of making life better for ordinary people. He was good at it. He slept well for the first time in years. When his daughter was born, he named her Hanul, which meant sky, because he wanted her to grow up looking up instead of looking for enemies. President Oh Mi-young did not run for re-election. When her term ended, she went back to her farming colony in the outer systems and put her hands in the soil and grew things. Reporters flew out to interview her. She answered their questions while pulling weeds, and when they asked her how she felt about reshaping galactic civilization, she wiped her forehead with the back of her hand and said, "The tomatoes do not care, and neither do I." She meant it. The galaxy had needed her for a moment, and she had done what needed to be done, and now the galaxy could take care of itself. She had radishes to plant. On a morning in early spring, Earth spring, not galactic standard, a young Pelori scholar arrived on Earth for the first time. Her name, translated roughly, meant the light that asks questions. She had traveled from the Pelori homeworld to study humans, to understand the species that had broken the unbreakable. She arrived in Busan because that was where Admiral Han Do-hyun taught, and she thought she would find answers in a military academy. She found a quiet man who told her to go outside and watch. So she stood in the streets of Busan, in the rain, and she watched. She watched humans arguing about where to eat lunch. She watched a woman chase a bus, and miss it, and laugh at herself. She watched an old man feed stray cats behind a restaurant, carefully, one by one, talking to them as if they could answer. She watched children run through puddles. She watched a couple sit on a bench and say nothing, just holding hands, watching the sea. She watched for 3 days. Then she recorded a message to her academy. I came here to study the species that broke the Duuni in 11 minutes. I expected to find warriors. Instead, I found people who argue about what to eat for lunch, and cry at sad songs, and run through the rain, instead of waiting for it to stop. I think that is what makes them dangerous. They are not a military species. They are not a conquering species. They are simply a species that refuses, with every part of their being, to be told what they cannot do. The council called it stubbornness. The Dumi called it madness. I have watched them for 3 days now, standing in their rain, and I think it is something else entirely. I think it might be hope. She closed the message and stood in the rain a while longer. It was cold, and it was wet, and it was nothing like the warm light of her homeworld. She liked it. She did not know why. Above her, past the clouds and the atmosphere and the thin blue line that separated Earth from everything else, the stars waited. They had always waited. And now, for the first time in a very long time, the galaxy was not afraid of what might be walking among them. It was something better than fear. It was curiosity. And that, more than any weapon or fleet or treaty, was how humanity changed the galaxy. Not by conquering it, not by ruling it, but by making it wonder what else was possible.